Welcome to the Mindful Movement Show. We're your hosts, Tony and Amanda Johnson.
This is a podcast dedicated to helping moms and dads heal their hurts, transform their health from the inside out, and become the best people, partners, and parents they can possibly be.
Our mission is to normalize struggle and profile stories of resilience, character building, and the process of healing and becoming.
In Season 1, we spotlight healers from a variety of modalities who are also parents. We hope you enjoy the show.
Greetings, Mindful and Fit family. We are so excited to welcome you to another episode of the Mindful Movement Show. You will be absolutely delighted and inspired by this week's guest, Caverly Morgan. Caverly is a meditation teacher, author, speaker, and founder of Peace in Schools, a nonprofit dedicated to integrating mindfulness teaching into secondary education. Her work is dedicated to personal and collective transformation, in addition to creating spaces for exchanging wisdom and cultivating belonging. She has a deep history of practicing Zen, including 8 years of training in a silent monastery. She has written 2 books, one for kiddos called A Kid's Book About Mindfulness, and she has recently published a title for adults entitled The Heart of Who We Are, Realizing Freedom Together. Her work has been featured on the cover of Mindful magazine and in the New York Times. She leads retreats, workshops, online classes, and brings insights, passion, warmth, and humor into her services of people of all ages. We are so excited to talk about her recent publication, specifically looking at the difference between surviving and thriving, how to realize our wholeness and embody the essence of who we are as people, partners, and parents. Welcome to the Mindful Movement Show, Caverly. It's an absolute joy to share this conversation with you. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and I just want to thank you for such a warm welcome. And I want to reflect back to you how contagious your high energy is. Like I feel ready. I don't know what we're about to talk about specifically, but I'm ready for whatever it is. Thanks for showing up in the way that you are.
Oh, we are just absolutely blessed to have you on. I think that the moment I saw the transcript of a segment of your book, I was just inspired. And as we kind of were talking before hitting record, it's amazing what happens when we act from the impulses of our heart. And I was just so inspired by your words and felt it absolutely a necessity to get your words out to our audience who may be struggling and need those words of compassion and support. So thank you.
And Caverly, we begin with a fundamental assumption that our experiences shape who we are and how we show up in the world. Do you mind sharing some of the formative experiences which shape how you show up as a partner, a teacher, an author, and a speaker?
Thank you so much. I want you to know that I actually didn't read these questions in advance because I find that it's so much more rich for me to see what arises upon hearing your question. And the first thing that arises is something that can sound a little cliche, but I do believe that everything that has happened to me has led me to where I am today. And so what's shaped me would be incalculable. How do you say that word? Incalculable? Unable to calculate.
Incalculable. Yeah.
That. And it's because I'm able to see now this is only rear view mirror looking, but as I look back, I'm able to see that events that didn't even feel like they were shaping me at the time absolutely did. Things that I might have written off as kind of insignificant, perhaps a chance, quote unquote, chance meeting. But then later that person becomes a very pivotal figure in my life. My current largest influence in my own meditation practice is someone that the first time I met him, I'd never heard of him before. I didn't necessarily think I'd see him again. It was just one evening event. I didn't make much of it. It's just a good example of all those moments in life where we're not even recognizing we're being shaped. But I imagine for all of us, we're all shaped by everything. Lastly, on that topic, it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about any form of awareness practice that one resonates with, because And I say that because I acknowledge there are many different doorways in. But the reason that is so significant for me is because we're not just bringing awareness, as if we wish to be awake in the world, we're not just bringing awareness to the things that our mind defines as significant. We're bringing awareness to all of it. And that's a really important aspect of trusting life as a practice to me.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful and profound. And I know that from listening to other iterations of your appearances on podcasts that you even met the person who helped you publish your kid's book randomly sitting next to you on an airplane. So further reinforcing the idea that you never know just how a moment can shape who you are. But if you're open to it and aware of the possibility and accepting of that possibility, it can have a profound influence.
And just to kind of follow up on that, so knowing or embracing the idea that what can seem like a small moment can affect, so much in your life. How does that worldview affect how you show up as a partner or a teacher or an author?
Well, in terms of the partner part, my husband's downstairs, so perhaps I should bring him on. He might have a different answer than I would about how I show up. No, I think he would say positive things as well, partly because we both have a commitment to showing up as fully as possible, right? It's a beautiful thing in a relationship when there's a shared desire to practice being awake in the world. And I say that recognizing that it can be a risky thing to say, because I certainly wouldn't want any listeners to feel like, oh, well, what should I do? I want to be awake in the world and my partner doesn't. So that's sort of a separate conversation, how to work with that, how to be with that. I certainly don't think that inherently means you can't be together. But I do acknowledge that I have a lot of gratitude that my husband and I both value a practice of awareness so very much. And I would say that to speak to a deeper layer of what I hear is under your question is, for me, the importance of paying attention to how and not just what. And what I mean by that is the value of recognizing process and not just content. So yes, does that land? Do you want to say anything about that before
I mean, for me, the basis of my own personal mindfulness practice is to enjoy each moment fully and completely without judgment, and to try and practice kindness and compassion. And I think that gets to the idea of process as opposed to a fixation or a focus on the outcome. And that's why I think it's a great segue into talking about your book. Of course, I would like to kind of get at what you mean by what being awake in the world or practicing awareness, what that means for you. But I have a feeling that you can kind of integrate that answer into my actual first question, which is, I perused mindful.org. I found a clip from your book that was on surviving and thriving. And I began furiously researching, what is her book called? What is the structure of it? The Heart of Who We Are, Realizing Freedom Together. Can you please tell us what inspired you to write it? Who will benefit from reading it? And what are some of the central themes and takeaways of the book?
My honest answer about what inspired me to write it, in a way, doesn't sound very lofty, in that I'm clear the initial inspiration had to do with my own reconciliation. And then, of course, there was a hope. I mean, that's the point of publishing, that my own process could touch other people, serve other people, support other people. But the initial call to sit down and write came from my own longing to not see what I like to talk about as the absolute as separate from the relative plane of experience. And so by relative plane, I mean everything that's changing all the time. The world of identity. I am a white woman. I am a published author. I'm a meditation teacher. The absolute, when I speak about the absolute, I'm referring to what doesn't change. And another way we could say that in the context of this book is the heart of who we are. So that deep sense of knowing your own being that has been the same. It's been with you throughout having kids, not having kids. So I happen to know you two have 2 children, yes?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So your being was the same before kids and after kids, but the content of your life, I can only imagine, has shifted a lot, and many daily processes has shifted a lot.
Always.
So yeah. So this reconciliation was important to me because in my monastic training, I felt that I had a lot of permission to focus on the absolute, like the deepest truth we all know, the truth of who we really are. And I didn't focus very much on the changing world that includes, how am I participating in systemic racism as a white woman, as I've made a commitment as a monastic to a life of non-harming? How am I being with the climate crisis and all of the various issues that we're facing today that when I was young, we weren't facing in the exact same way? And I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that there wasn't systemic racism when I was growing up, but the forms are shifting, how oppression's manifesting, how we're treating the planet. We have seen the heat increase. No pun intended when referring to the climate crisis, but we're seeing the heat increase around these worldly relative plane issues. So how to reconcile this deep experience of practice with all of these issues?
Yeah, I think that is incredible. It touches my heart in such a special way that if you don't mind, I'm going to share a quick story that I did not plan on sharing. We had our first child 13 days before the lockdown for the pandemic. And then we had our second child in December of 2021. And we were going through a really rough period as a couple. And I was going through a deeply challenging period as a person. And we always look at each other and we use this metaphor of no matter what happens, as long as we know we're rowing the boat in the same direction, that we can rekindle whatever, is stopping us from being a deeply connected, intimate partnership. And I knew that that my pain was being projected onto her and the baby was feeling it. And I took her to the beach in Galveston, Texas. And I sat down with her in our goofy little beach chairs we bought years prior. And I asked her a question. I said, who do you believe I am at my essence? And, clearly the way I was performing or behaving or believing myself to be in those moments were not reflective of the heart of who I am. And maybe I even needed the external validation at the time that person was still there. And I'll fast forward the story a bit to say that we had a deeply intimate, connected, bonding experience on the beach where, months of suffering dissipated as we recognized the heart of who we are. I wonder if you can explain how your book might touch people in those ways, or what the process of reconciliation was like for you as you reconciled the difference or are continuing to reconcile the difference between this duality that you're speaking of, between the universal or the essence of who we are and then the ever-changing part.
Well, first, I just want to thank you so much for sharing that experience. It really moved me. And part of my husband's a wedding photographer, so he's seen a lot of weddings. And one of the things he said to me is, we had the weirdest wedding of anyone I've ever seen. And I think it's because we spent a lot of time crafting pretty unique vows. And I hadn't been to a lot of weddings, so I didn't realize it was pretty unique to have like our vows took a long time. It wasn't just like this quick experience. But one of the things we did that has shown up in our moments of stress or difficulty is we made a commitment publicly to remembering who the other person is at their core, even in times of difficulty. And that was a stand we were taking in knowing that as we moved through the world together, we wanted to have that be what was uniting us. And it wasn't long ago that we were in a difficult moment, and I reminded him of that commitment, and it shifted the entire conversation. Because, when we're with a partner, the temptation's great to forget who they really are and only see who they're conditioned to be, who they're habituated to be, how society or traumatic experiences or upbringing has shaped a person to be. And if I'm meeting my husband from my conditioned stuff, and he's meeting me from his conditioned stuff. We've lost essence to essence communication, conversation, let's get out of this and row the boat together type of teamwork. So I just want to reflect to you that that's, to me, very moving testimony, if you will, and that is truthfully what the book is all about. It's about how to remember for ourselves who we really are, to not be confused about who we're conditioned to be, and to see clearly that who I'm conditioned to be is different than who I truly am. And then to actually, what the book does is it supports the reader, hopefully, in being able to see that these practices that we can apply personally, we can also apply collectively. So in what ways have we collectively forgotten who we are? How in different collective groups of people are we forgetting truth, if you will, the truth of the essence of things, and instead responding out of habit, pain. Resmaa Menakem, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands, talks about how we blow our trauma through other people, and we blow our trauma through other settings and circumstances. So how can we be attentive to where we're doing that, how we're doing that, when we're doing that, and even why we're doing that, and how can we see the suffering that gets created because of that, and then consciously return to the heart of who we are, to our inherent connection, to our shared being.
Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's beautiful. And I do want to reflect, my background is in conflict management, and there are very similar principles, both in theory and in practice, that what applies to the individual, whether it be shifting through trauma or conflict or uncovering the self, do translate to larger problems, whether it be interpersonal or on a community basis. And I just wanted to kind of highlight that point that you made to our readers or our listeners as well, that sometimes when we're working through our own stuff, and even what you were sharing with our relationship, what an impact that can have on a relationship or a community. And it sounds like your book is incredibly valuable, not just because of what it brings to the individual, but what it can give as well. So thank you for that.
If I can add something to that, I think that it's pretty well known, but rarely practiced, that the idea that the best thing I can do for you, like as in our partnership, or for the best thing I can do for my family or my community, is work on me, because that has the residual reverberating effects. I think all too often there's a focus or a fixation on, I need to change you, which is again projecting, rather than looking inward and asking, how does changing me have that influence or have that effect?
I need to start with me, and then it'll. And speaking of kind of an organic evolution, if we could shift here, we have certainly found that the organic evolution from A House of Peace to the Presence Collective is just so inspiring. And I'm wondering if you can share the origin of your nonprofit and how it has grown, and maybe even how it's evolved or changed over the years.
Thank you. I founded One House of Peace when I lived in Sacramento, and it was really shortly after having been a monastic. And it was a very simple start. It was a very humble beginning. I started the nonprofit because people who were coming to my regular meditation group said, "You're asking for donations." I was doing everything on donation basis. And they were like, I want to be able to get a tax write-off. And so it was really just like a technical, I guess I have to get nonprofit status then, like this little that's just the next step sort of mentality. The magic in that time was in how that came to be. And I left the monastery. I had very little money. When I was a monastic, we didn't have cell phones or email accounts or bank accounts. And so I left, and I had $2,000 to my name, and I didn't feel that I had enough money to rent a space to offer practice to other people and a space to live. So especially knowing that I had, my skill was meditation. So, try to monetize that. Like I wasn't thinking I was going to be getting rich anytime soon is my point. Right. So I put signs all over Sacramento on the telephone poles saying, are you interested in, at the time it was a house of peace. It later became one house of peace. But the sign saying, here's what I'm looking to create. Anyone interested, meet me at 10 a.m. every Sunday at the Coffee Garden, and we'll talk about it. And so for weeks, there was just this little group of people forming. And then a woman named Roberta Jan Johnson walked in and said, my tenants just moved out. I have a house that I will give you rent free for 6 months to start this project. So
Wow.
the program began in a very community minded way. And yeah, it is a wow, isn't it? I mean, there was a certain magic to feeling so supported in this vision. So I lived in the back of the house, and the living room, quote unquote, was a meditation hall, and people came for practice. And then on a technical level, what happened is I began volunteering in schools while also teaching adults. Slowly, Peace in Schools formed. And then the technical piece is Peace in Schools ended up taking the 501c3, the nonprofit status of One House of Peace, because donors couldn't find us in the directories. Like, what is this One House of Peace thing? We want to give to Peace in Schools. We want to give to bringing Peace in Schools. Created the first semester-long mindfulness course in the country. And it's a credited class. And so folks were excited to support this vision. But again, it was just confusing to people. What's the relationship between One House of Peace and Peace in Schools? So Peace in Schools at that point in time took the name took over the nonprofit, which was healthy because it let the things I was doing with adults be teased apart from Peace in Schools. So it was kind of a natural time to go ahead and make a distinction between the work of Peace in Schools and then what has become the work of Presence Collective. Presence Collective is the cross-cultural community of teachers who are committed to creating wisdom spaces for wisdom exchange and belonging. And what's so rich about this collective of people, it's five of us, 5 teachers. What's so rich is that we're moving at the speed of trust. So you may have heard that phrase from the Black Lives Matter movement, but it's a very organic, gentle unfolding that in this moment is very focused on how can we support each other as we do the work we're doing in the world. And I've also had the pleasure of co-leading some experiences with Jelani Mott in particular, and we're hoping to lead a retreat in 2023 as well. And then it's actually not being run through Presence Collective, but Rashid Hughes is one of the members, and he and I are creating a 4-month-long book collective experience where folks who are interested in this book can move through the book in an engaged way for 4 months with me and with Rashid. And that's very stimulating to me because this book is meant to be experienced collectively. It's actually not I've joked in a few different places that I actually wanted to make it very clearly a book that's not to be read on your own. And then, of course, my publisher was like, why would we cut out a whole market of people that would want to buy the book? No, we're not doing that. So instead, it's a book that says, if you want to read it on your own, no problem. Read it on your own. You'll get a lot out of it. And it's meant to be, it's an invitation for direct engagement. And so many of the practices are collective practices. So I'm excited to create this course with Rashid that will take folks through the journey of the book and say, as we do these practices, okay, what's this like in community? How are we waking up together?
And I have to honor the evolution of that story and all of the ways in which you've combined your skill that you built over time with your desire to serve and your ability to be creative as a way to help people feel a collective sense of belonging and feel safe to undergo practices of self-exploration, quote, at moving at the speed of trust. First of all, I'm going to sign up. I think that, any listeners, any listeners that want to join us to join our collective read through of this text, I think the more the merrier. But I think
Tony,
I just had to honor. Go ahead.
No, thank you. No, if I can just jump in, one thing that I'm hoping might happen, we'll see, but it would be so rich if pockets of communities did do it together. So because we're going to
Absolutely.
have affinity groups, and these affinity groups won't just be racial affinity groups, meaning split according to race. There might be a BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, people of color group, and there might be those who identify as white group. But I think there will also be groups that are like, hey, I'm an educator, and I want to move through this with other educators. I want to be connecting with other educators about how this applies to the classroom. Or, hey, we're part of the community of this podcast, and we know that we have all these different ways we intersect and touch in. So we want to move through it together. So thanks for naming that. Gets me kind of excited.
And I don't know if we want to keep this in the recording or not, but where I went to graduate school is the Kroc School of Peace and Justice. And that is a laboratory where things like this would be incredibly accepted. And how beautiful would it be? I would love to make an introduction of it to that campus, but how beautiful would it be to introduce it to, campuses all around the world where, especially in colleges and universities, that is one place where there are laboratories where people are still open, hopefully, to that communal collective idea of healing together or learning together, so that could be a really beautiful place to, start something like that as well.
I mean, Amanda, I hope actually that we will, not we, because I don't have a say over what gets edited out, but I hope you'll keep that in the podcast. And the reason why is that could plant a seed for someone else. Like, oh yeah, there's that community I was part of a long time ago, but it would be fun to rekindle something or open a door. And because that is, again, that is how this is meant to serve. How are we healing, remembering who we truly are, and then acting in the world on behalf of that, knowing personally and collectively. So making these collective commitments to each other is an important part of the book. We don't just need personal transformation right now. Our world doesn't just need people to experience personal transformation.
Absolutely. And we're so locked into our phones and our computers. We do so much individually. How beautiful is it that there's this, I don't want to say tool, but a pathway to be able to engage with other people in an uplifting and positive way.
Yeah, a text that can empower authentic human connection from our hearts, right? And on that note, I read on your website and have heard you talk about this in other settings. And I wanted you to unpack a few things specifically for me, if you don't mind, in the context of our current socio-political or cultural climate. You talk about 2 medicines for healing our collective moment. Can you unpack each of them and discuss how the folks at the Presence Collective are helping others with both medicines?
Yes. Can you say a little bit more? I don't have that particular line in front of me. It says, I remember it says there are 2 medicines for our time. Can you just say a little bit more about what's right after that?
Yeah. So in the context of the book and what I've read is, in order for us to heal the collective moment, we have to be able to turn inward and embrace one another from that place. And you specifically talked about 2 medicines of healing. And basically it is a heart-centeredness and an ability to see, in my words, sameness and difference. The ability for collective healing to transform us from maybe an ego-driven perspective or a defensiveness to a ability to at least connect with one another and respect our differences.
Yes, thank you. I wrote that years ago. I actually wrote it before I wrote the book. In some ways, I think that was part of the spark of the book, is recognizing how much the practices that I share in the book, and many of those practices are practices I've shared through Peace in Schools and with teenagers as well, and is part of the semester-long curriculum. Practices like recognizing internal negative self-talk, forming a relationship with the compassionate mentor within, being able to see the conditioned mind and disidentify from the conditioned mind and remember who we truly are. So these tools and practices, the part of what is medicinal to me is being able to directly name how these tools have transformed my life personally. The medicine for my own experience of being alive is medicine that I don't have a lot of words for in terms of its potency. I would not be living the life I'm living now were it not for the practice that was offered to me and that I've fallen in love with. So part of what is medicinal to me is this recognition of where we are now in our world, in our society, in our collectives, and taking those same practices, but again, applying them collectively. So moving, I didn't come up with this phrase, I don't know who did, but it's often talked about as the movement from I to we. So many of us are habituated to have a mindfulness practice that in a subtle way can reinforce the sense of I'm separate. I'm getting better at mindfulness. I'm becoming less reactive and more responsive. Oh, that's good. Oh, shoot. Today I was really reactive. That's bad. I have a bad mindfulness practice. Why should I continue? Oh, today was great. I did mindful eating. Aren't I wonderful for remembering that? Oh, today I forgot all about mindful eating and I stuffed my face. I'm a terrible person. So it's keeping in place me, this person who's trying to be better in life. Not bad, not wrong, but things shift when we disidentify from that view of I and truly begin focusing on what's beyond that limited definition of me, or I like to talk about the I, me, my mind. So if we're identified with I, me, my, we will always be left feeling the limitations of I, me, my mind.
I love that. And as you're talking, I am thinking back to Alan Watts. Have you heard any of his lectures? Love Alan Watts. And he has a lecture that talks about the idea of the I versus the we. And really the only reason why there is a me and a you is because there's this thing that we have called space in between us. And if it wasn't for space, there really wouldn't be any separation. And even within our own molecules and atoms, there's space. And so there is this idea that there's this constant separation, and yet we're also incredibly united by it too. And I think it's just beautiful what you're speaking to, this idea that we can be so focused on ourselves that we're forgetting about this larger energy or connectedness that we have with each other. And so thank you for sharing that. I think that's really beautiful.
And I also
thank you.
I mean, my heart's almost telling me to say as a young person, I had a lot of toxicity and trauma in my family. I was labeled a behavioral problem. I think I got suspended from the last week of school in 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. I was always in the principal's office. I began to wear that as part of who I am. And on the other side of it, I was being bullied for everything from weight to hygiene issues. And I internalized a lot of this stuff. And one of the things that I know now as a 34-year-old man is, wow, a mindfulness practice in schools has the ability to unlock internalized shame and of bullying, to unlock a developing mind's understanding of who they are and what they're capable of, and to create that connection. So off script, I just want to know, what have been the results of this mindfulness program in schools? And, maybe why do you believe that that's not taught more consistently, especially with mindfulness as a practice being more mainstream, becoming more normalized, and I don't like the word normalized, but more integrated into our understanding?
Well, first, thank you for sharing your experience. I often talk about how the most common thing I hear from people when they learn about what we're doing with peace in schools is, if I had that when I was that age, my life would be very different. So it's true. Our young people have so much information coming at them. And in the average high school, there's very little focus on, okay, well, who is all that information coming at? And so one thing I love about working with teens is teens are quick to be excited to even just conceptually dismantle identity. So wait a second, what does it mean to be the bullied kid? Is that who I really am? Wait, what does it mean? Why? What, as you know, we focus on coping mechanisms and survival strategies in our curriculum.
Yeah.
So for a teen to be able to say, oh, wait a second, I actually am getting in all these fights as a coping mechanism. And my survival strategy is to be the tough one that nobody can touch. And for a young person to be able to see all of that and then say, but guess what? That's not who I really am. It's really quite magnificent. And so to answer your question about how it's going, and by the way, there are a lot of stories about peace in schools in this book. So if people are lit up by hearing some specific anecdotes, there are many. I think I talk about peace in schools in every chapter, actually, because for me, it's the on the ground lab. It's one thing to have lofty discussion about applying practice tools collectively, and wouldn't that be lovely? And I don't want to diminish that, because if someone's talking about that but they don't have a place to see it on the ground, they shouldn't not talk about it. I don't think so. I want to, uplift that, but maybe I should have focused on the way in which I feel blessed that I've gotten to watch what that is firsthand, because I've watched not only personal transformation in a classroom, but I've watched an entire class transform based on a practice of meeting each other essence to essence, based on we're all unpacking what is this whole identity we're downloading personally and collectively together, based on learning how to be able to be vulnerable together and to expose negative self-talk rather than just believe that it's true. I would say that the class is a class that's quite empowering for students. And why are we not doing that everywhere? I think the rest of my life will probably be dedicated to continuing to play my part in shifting that, because I often in our organization, we talk about how at one point in time, we thought it was crazy not to have physical fitness, or now we think it's crazy not to have physical fitness in schools. But at one point in time, that was the norm. You all are, given your backgrounds, quite dialed into that. So, how are we ignoring the important things collectively is part of what prompted to write this book. We are conditioned, we are habituated by just through living in this society to normalize the absurd, a phrase I first heard from the teacher Michelle Cassandra Johnson, who wrote Finding Refuge. We have a collective process of normalizing of the absurd. It's absurd to put a teenager with all those hormones, with all that life force, all that energy, everything going on, in just desk experience after desk experience and after desk experience all day long, with no attention to the body, no attention to how we're being embodied, no attention to how to listen to the body for cues about our own well-being, no attention on expressing energy through the body. Like that's absurd. I think the same thing is true. I think the same thing, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think the same thing's true about the kind of, Angel Acosta uses this term, healing-centered education. How it's absurd to have education that is not revolving around wholeness, healing, who we truly are. And to not have education, have that as a primary focus, along with all of the other things that we're learning, but to really have a space where we're cultivating this inner landscape. It's absurd that we're not doing that in every high school setting.
Absolutely. And as you're saying this, I'm thinking of a lot of our listeners who are parents, maybe even parents of teens or of, older children who might have children in those spaces. What tools or what skills or recommendations, maybe just if you could pick a couple, would you share with parents who are like, you know what, I want to know more about this. How can I help my teen, maybe outside of school? How can I help them to embrace some of these concepts that she's talking about?
Well, the first thing that comes up is to make sure as a parent that you're not accidentally pushing it. because there will be nothing that will drive a teenager away. I work mostly with teens, so I'll just speak about teens.
No, this is
Maybe
good.
a young,
Preach.
maybe a third grader who's still, hasn't individuated from mom is like, oh, you think it's cool? I think it's cool. Right. But, one thing that I think can be helpful for parents is to remember that if you're simply embodying what you're learning through having a practice, everyone around you will get curious about what you're doing. So if you're suddenly enjoying life more, feeling more free, feeling like you can be yourself, more present, more engaged with life, not checking out all the time. People tend to, teens, even younger colleagues, they tend to notice and say, like, how can I get some of that? Like, what are you doing? So I think the first thing I'd like to offer is just the importance of modeling for our young people what this alternative is, and then letting a young person get curious. By default, I have a very dear friend whose kids started meditating with him just because that's what he did every day. He never said, come meditate with me. It's really helpful. It'll help you with stress. That's just what he did every day. And it's like the kids were kind of like, you always come out of that kind of blissed out. Like, I want to know what you're doing. And so it's just really, really organic. And I think that's why it's so important to me that our Peace in Schools class is an elective credit course. We're not saying everybody should be more mindful and this is the way to do it. That actually is just part of a systemic structure of oppression and marginalization, maintaining marginalization and a sort of power over versus power with approach, which I talk about in my book. So letting it be truly opt-in seems like perhaps one of the most important things.
Yeah, I think I have to honor the way you share the wisdom of your experience, because it's one thing to practice it. It's another, practice mindfulness, practice awareness. It's another thing to embody it. And when somebody embodies it in a way that is so poetic and touching, I just have to acknowledge that. We like to talk about mindful and fit because we believe that it is, for many people, a great way to practice embodiment is to integrate breath to movement, whether it be formal walking meditation, yoga, or even just embracing breath to movement during strength training. What is your experience, or what do you believe the relationship is between mindfulness or meditation and movement? And how has movement been a coping tool for you as you've been trying to practice this throughout your adult life?
Well, I see it as somewhat problematic that movement is so often left out of the picture. That's why I got kind of lit up by acknowledging the physical education metaphor, because this is part of collective conditioning to move through the world from our heads. And when we're moving through the world from our heads, we literally forget we have bodies. We forget about our somatic experience of existence. And it's easier for me to be harmful to this body mind if I identify as just being my thoughts. And it's easier to do that with other people too. Wow. So embodiment, as having a practice of embodiment, whatever that is, I'm a big fan of find your own doorway to truth. And so it really is, I think, important to acknowledge that for one person, that's going to be a very physical experience. And for another person, it's going to be a stretch to just weave in a little bit of mindful movement every day, which might manifest as some gentle stretching, but it's a time where there's a recognition of what's beyond just this like bubble of the thinking mind. So in our Peace in Schools classes, we always combine mindful movement with the lesson. Every lesson has an experience of mindful movement. You all need to come visit, by the way. I think you would really,
I would love to.
Really enjoy it. I don't even know where you're located. Where are you located?
Grass Valley. So California. In between Sacramento and Tahoe.
Yeah, y'all are close. I'm just in Portland, Oregon. So our door is open. You can come visit anytime.
That'd be amazing.
So it's really a lovely thing to sit in the class and experience the way in which this movement portion, it prepares the student for whatever the mindful lesson is going to be. It allows us to drop into an experience of being embodied, being grateful for our bodies, listening to our bodies, letting the body be the doorway to an experience of presence. And then
that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, isn't it? Because it primes us for whatever might be happening next. In particular, maybe something hard is about to happen. It's not a entirely like warm and fuzzy curriculum. I mean, not everybody in this life is ready to address the negative self-talk that we have. Most people are not aware that this voice of the inner critic is actually running the show as much as it is. And then step one of recognizing it can be quite distressing to realize, how much our world meaning world in quotes, right? Like how much our small reality, not reality with a capital R, is being governed by this created story of lack and deprivation and scarcity and all the ways that whatever I do will never be enough. And so I'm constantly striving and constantly efforting. So I'm being a bit verbose here, but I think,
please,
tie it up.
Please.
We're eating it up.
I think, just to tie it up, I see this practice of recognizing and being in our bodies as an integral part of creating the foundation for all of the transformation that can occur in a practice. That's why I'm sure you all know that ages ago, yoga was not designed as some like fitness program. Yoga was a way to support meditators, take care of the body as you are preparing the body for what it means to go through a journey that a meditation practice offers.
Yoga means, we were just talking about this yesterday. Yoga in Sanskrit means to yoke, to connect the mind and body with the spirit. And before we transition, you said you were being verbose, but I was like, please keep talking. There's some things that I just am naturally gravitated to, and it's your discussion of embodiment that was like, wow, that lit off some even more light bulbs for me. So I really thank you for that. I want to honor that we're recording this on the first day of Black History Month, and it will air toward the end of Black History Month. And we've hinted at it a bit, but I'd like you to, if possible, discuss what you believe the relationship is between consciousness raising or awareness practice, mindfulness, and systemic injustice, to be what the relationship between those variables are from your perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for acknowledging this month. If I tie it back to the beginning of our conversation, what I would say is that it's not separate. And that's part of the importance of the movement we're in now, to not see our movement for justice as separate from our movement toward enlightenment, or whatever everyone's got a potentially different way to talk about how they'd label what title they would give to their longing to be awake in the world. So maybe someone listening just calls that my mindfulness practice. Maybe someone calls it my path to awakening, my path to enlightenment. But at the core, it's the same flame. The flame is the longing to know who we are on the deepest level, and then to have our actions in the world be on behalf of who we truly are, rather than on behalf of the ego, or a sense of lack, or a sense of deprivation, or a scarcity mindset in general. Not just lack, like I lack something, I'm deprived, but just this overarching scarcity mindset. So our movement for justice in the world, for it to not be seen as other than our movement to remember who we truly are, is incredibly important. Because I'll speak about it in the negative for a moment, because if we're forgetting that, we've created an artificial compartmentalization that doesn't serve our awakening. So we've said, me getting in touch with my inherent liberation is over here in this box, and then everyone being able to access resources equally, everyone being able to feel safe walking around in the streets, like that's this other box. And it's an artificial construction that can never actually work from the perspective of, from our inherent liberation, there is no construct separating these boxes. So the longer we keep the boxes in the place, the longer we're keeping something in place that keeps us from awakening to who we truly are.
And I'm drawing a lot of parallels between what you're speaking to now and what you were speaking to earlier, which is that division that some of us, even in our course for trying to become more awake or enlightened or whatever you call it, have created this division still between like the person and the collective, or me and other. And
well, and I think that, like, without going too far down this particular path, the duality, like in Western society, the Cartesian dualism of the mind and the body as being separate has reinforced the idea that we live from the mind. And where are these divisions most acute, and where do they stem from to create that physical violence? It's from being in the mind.
The mind.
And the stories we create about our neighbors, the people down the road, what people look like, how people show up. And
yes,
I just, again, please, can we come to Portland? That would be so cool.
Anytime. I'm serious. We're just right in the middle of our second semester. So, or let's see, are we about to start it? Anyway, we're at a good time to come. Like, don't come at the end of the school year because kids get really squirrely. So come sometime before come sometime before like May. But I really, I want to underline what you're saying and acknowledge the importance of moving into a life that can see the storylines that we run, but not be identified with them. We're not going to make the storylines go away, but to have the conscious ability to disidentify from storylines that are completely created is why I have the subtitle for the book of Realizing Freedom Together.
I love that.
And I think it's such a beautiful poetic way to describe, what some people would say is, okay, we have a negativity bias. The average person thinks somewhere near 80,000 thoughts a day, and 60 to 80% of them are going to be negative. That's been an evolutionary byproduct that's kept us safe and alive over, centuries. But I think you just have such a, like I said, poetic way of phrasing it that is like amazing. And for anyone who is as excited as I am to learn, as we are, I didn't want to speak for you.
Well, speak for me.
To learn about the ways in which they can learn from your immense wisdom, can you offer a rundown of the ways in which our listeners can either interact with you online or in person?
Absolutely. Yeah. And by the way, Tony, I'm actually flipping through the book right now because it'd be fun if I could read you a little excerpt from the Return to Embodiment chapter. I really feel like you're going to geek out on this chapter. I think you're just going to nerd out about it, man. So
yeah, totally will.
Already there.
You know
honestly.
Me too well. Yeah.
This question or the chapter 10 starts with, the title of this chapter is Return to Embodiment, Releasing the Mind into the Heart. And Sri Nisargadatta said, the mind creates the abyss, the heart crosses it. So that you'd like that.
Write it down.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I will. Let me see if there's just one more little thing that could be interesting to, I'll just trust. Oh, shoot. There's actually a lot that we've talked about that I could riff off from this chapter because
Go for it.
It speaks to the body and our relationship to the way we're conditioned to perceive the body. But one of the things that I think you both will geek out about is there's a part of the chapter that talks about cheap memberships and belonging. So that is referring to the way in which we want to belong. And then instead of getting in touch with all the various ways we inherently belong, or the one way we inherently belong, and then the various forms that can take, we look for cheap ways to belong. And by cheap, I mean like joining a group of people who are committed to hate. Like that's there's a certain belonging there, but it's a cheap membership. But it has very much to do with our bodies, the bodies of other people, how the storylines we have about other people. I mean, just think of any white supremacist group. Their existence thrives in storyline. Mm-hmm. So anyway, there's that part of the chapter.
That's great.
And there's a whole section that I think you both will like a lot, that is about how to have the body as a gateway to a larger experience of ourselves. So what I mean by that is, in mindfulness practice, step one is to say the body's always in the present moment. So that's a great anchor. I can always come back to the body because the body's always here and now. So in this book, what I do is I unpack the ways in which that's lovely, useful, helpful, and it can serve as a step one of sorts. That actually, if we fully identify with the body, that can be as limiting as if we fully identify as I am these thoughts. So it can be equally important to recognize I am not this body while honoring the body. So letting the body be a gateway into a larger experience of who we truly are is something I think you two will nerd out about when you get to that.
Oh my gosh.
When you get to chapter 10.
Beautiful. That's
yes.
Wonderful.
And I just want to reiterate that the reason why we started this podcast was to normalize struggle and to profile teachers, authors, healers, and coaches who have their own journey of becoming, and so that they could speak to whatever wisdom or insight or experience emerged from that. And to be truthful, I just identify with so much of what you're saying, because I personally, again, I just don't want to speak for Amanda, know that in my journey, which is still ever evolving, the central anchoring point is the return to the present moment and my breath and my body. And I've walked that journey back and forth as a pendulum of sorts between living in the mind, rattled by anxiety in the monkey mind, and then over identifying with the muscles or the mirror and stuff like that. And knowing that we have the awareness of awareness itself, pure consciousness, to tap into is what I believe to be the healing point or freedom, so to speak, from a lot of the ways we've been conditioned. And so thank you once again. I cannot wait to read. I think our copy just arrived today, to read the book with Amanda and to dig deeper, because this conversation has inspired even more of a focus and a drive
and
to
a
do
fire.
that. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, the fire.
Yeah. Keep stoking that fire.
Yeah, friends, thank you so much. I'm feeling the same resonance, and I really appreciate how you just voiced what you voiced, Tony, about the movement from the body as an anchor and a support to that next experience that's available to us. And I say next because for most people, it does tend to have a progression. Like it starts with, I just need to be able to stabilize the attention and learn how to place it where I want it to be. That's just such a critical step one. Before we teach teens in peace in schools, even any form of meditation, we just teach teens to recognize that for most of us, our attention's all over the place. And it's very empowering to realize that you can put it where you want it to be. So that stabilization process is something that I have a tremendous amount of gratitude for. And to then also be able to receive the richness of being aware of awareness itself, that's a whole other conversation. And that's a conversation that is at the core of this book. There are a lot of tools and practices that can support us in different ways, relationships at work, in community. But the core of the book is about remembering that we are that pure consciousness. We are the awareness that is ever presently aware. So moving through the world from that recognition is a really different different way to move through the world, different way to create, different way to love, different way to give, different way to receive, different way to listen, different way to speak.
And it is the fuel for collective transformation.
It's the fuel for collective transformation. If our collective transformation is only being fueled by I'm right and they're wrong, and so I am going to fight for my cause and I'm going to like smash the bad people in the head, we'll always be fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that middle path.
And so I do want to make sure that we highlight the ways in which, like say one of our listeners wants to go to a retreat you run, or wants
read
to
one of your books.
Yep. How can our listeners interact with
find you
in a formal way?
Thank you. Yes. So my website's easy to remember. It's caverlymorgan.org, caverlymorgan.org. And Peace in Schools is just peaceinschools.org. Presence Collective is just presencecollective.org. I have good karma around URLs, I think.
I was going to say.
And many thanks to my mom for giving me a weird name, because then it's like, it was really easy to get my own name. I don't have to be like Caverly Morgan 1074.
Right. 19 or something. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But so that's my website. And I love leading retreats. Thanks for just naming retreats. I have a retreat in the spring at Esalen. I have a retreat this summer on Whidbey Island. Incredibly beautiful. I'm very committed to bringing people into beautiful spaces where they can
absolutely
feel the benefit of being in a natural space where something other than our conditioned reality is being reflected back to us as we meditate, as we experience mindful movement. Esalen, summer, Whidbey Island, and more. Michelle Cassandra Johnson and I don't think it's up online yet, but we're doing a retreat together in the fall. I don't think details are up, but I do a winter retreat every year in California. So I have a feeling I'll see you all again on retreat or something. I would love it.
You definitely will be. And for the listeners, I'll put in the show notes all of the ways in which you can contact her and any publicly available links to retreats that she's running.
And Caverly, what a gift of your time. And thank you so much for speaking with us. And I feel like I have learned so much from this conversation, and you're a truly inspiring person. So
and a gift to the world.
Earth.
Like we are
thank
very
you
grateful
very much.
Well, friends, thank you. You've been so sweet to be so complimentary, and I really do appreciate your work and your call to make this world a better place. Like we each have a dance that's ours, or a song that's ours to sing. So thank you for singing your song and bringing what you're bringing to community. And in the name of that, I was geeking out about chapter 10 and knowing that you all are going to like it, but you have to read it in order. Don't cheat. Okay. Because there's an arc to the book. Chapter 10, it happens at a specific point. So,
okay.
Chapter 10. I thought maybe I could end with a little something that I stumbled upon when I opened up chapter 10, because I wanted to share parts of the book with you. So this is short. It's called A Prayer for This Beloved Community. If we fully take this on as ours, whatever arrives on our doorstep, the messiness, the discomfort, all of it, if we say yes, this too is us. If we move toward rather than away, if we embrace all of it, leaving nothing out, may we be freed to ask, free to listen. Now, in this moment, how are we called to respond? How, with our shared, disarmed, open heart, are we moved? How will our lives be a loving response to what is? How will we serve the vision of healing and remembrance for all? As we realize that everything is us and none of it is personal, may we be free to touch the possibility of choice, free to make decisions informed by the qualities inherent in us, in true nature, love, peace, justice. How will this manifest in this moment, here, now? May we be a conduit for this. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Lovely spending time together. Thank you.
Take care.
Wow, what an episode. Thank you for listening. We hope you took some meaningful tools and skills that empower you to become your highest self in every way.
We also hope you'll help us spread our messages of solidarity, social support, and consciousness raising by subscribing to our YouTube channel at Mindful and Fit and offering us an honest 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts.
Doing so helps more people hear these important messages of love, healing, and becoming.
And as always, much love from the Johnson family. We hope you make today amazing.
Just like you.